Where is Highlife now? I mean, you've told us where it came from, the multiple sources. Where is Highlife now, as we speak?
Well, of course, it evolved into so many varieties. I mean, just to go
through them.
Yeah, through the. Well, I would claim, some people wouldn't, that both Fella's Afrobeat and the Osibisa's Afro Rock both came from Highlife, because all of those musicians were trained in big band, dance band, Highlife bands. Fella, you know, he was with, was it Victor Olaya's band and so on, and his first band, Kulo Lubitos, was basically a Highlife band. And then Mac Tonto and Teddy Osei were with the Highlife bands, the big bands, not the guitar bands. They came from the dance band format. And then...
So your theory is that Highlife is actually almost like, in a way, responsible for, contributed to Fela and Osibisa's music.
Yes. Well, they even have music for Gong Gong, which is usually a typical Highlife rhythm.
Yes.
And Fela himself says this quite... I mean, he used to come to Ghana in the 60s because his heroes were Huru Band, and he used to stay at a Huru house. So, I mean, when does a genre become a separate genre, and how much is it beholden to previous genres? But I would say that Highlife dance band, that is the dance band variety, not the guitar band, was the mother, if anything, of Afrobeat and Afro rock. But then there was also Burger Highlife, the Ghanaians who ran away to Germany and crossed it over with disco music.
Yeah,
and
Charles Amoah,
yeah, exactly. And then we have the gospel Highlife, which is probably, since the 70s and 80s, with the emergence of danceable, commercial Christian dance music, I would call it, a lot of it really is basically Highlife music. Sometimes it's reggae or rhythm and blues.
Mostly women too, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's because of the, well, I think the reason for this is that in the gospel bands, this is where women really, it opened up an avenue for women professional singers. You know, when I was first in Ghana, I could count the number of professional female pop singers, Highlife or whatever you want to call it, on my two hands. Literally. I mean, one of the first was E.T. Mensah. E.T. Mensah, this guy is really quite annoying.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, it's like having your tooth out. So E.T. Mensah was the first to put a woman on stage. There was no Highlife singer woman before.
He put a woman on stage for the first time?
3 times over,
wow.
Including his own wife, and then Juliet O'Kine, Agnes Aiti. And that was, I think, because of the influence of American jazz superstars like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan. So they were saying that, well, if we're going to be influenced by American jazz, we can also maybe open up a possibility. Yeah. And the same thing happened in Nigeria. They had a woman called, what was she called? Not Cassava, forgotten her name. There were a couple of important singers in Nigeria, female.
Do you know what the reaction was to the introduction of these women?
Well, at first it was very tough going, because there have been no women in Highlife for 50 years, since its inception. So there was a sort of an idea that a woman, and the concert parties were using men dressed up as women.
To portray women.
Yeah, but that was because of the life on the road. It wasn't that they didn't like women or they were being misogynist. But there was a...
Or cross-dressers.
Yeah, yeah. But in fact, I mean, if you think about it, the British brought in extreme misogyny. The British themselves were misogynist culture. I mean, you know, back under the colonial days, women didn't have the vote in Britain. Women couldn't play in orchestras. They couldn't be doctors. They couldn't be nurses. So a lot of it, I think, came because popular music. You see, because traditional African music, women have always played a role. There's no African women music, traditional, where women play no role. They're sometimes separate and so on, or they're separate female genres.
There's always a role.
Yeah, yes. But the British, when it came to popular music, because it's a transcultural music with a Western and an African element, I guess you could say that the whites' misogyny, hatred of their own women, percolated into this. Maybe, I'm not sure, because you don't see any women appear in Highlife music in Nigeria or South Africa. Miriam Makeba, exactly the same thing. Miriam Makeba came up in the late 1940s, early 50s, the same time these ladies, Juliet O'Kine, were coming up in Ghana, through their big band. They didn't call it Highlife. They would have called it Township Jazz or whatever. So it was in the context of jazz. And the role models of people like Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald, I think. And in fact, Miriam Makeba actually mentions those two ladies' names as inspirers. So the same thing was happening in different Africa, English, I suppose this was English-speaking Africa, where jazz was more popular in the French-speaking countries because of the language of jazz is English, and so the English colonies. But it did seem to have opened. But even with E.T. Mensah, the number of women, by the time I started playing bands in Ghana around about 1970, there was still only about 10 women in Ghana who had gone on to, you know, Christy Ozuma, there was, later, there was this Charlotte Dada, there were a few of them, but they were so rare. But the thing that really opened up things for women was gospel music.
It opened up a space for them.
Because it's the same like in America, the black gospel in America has opened up a huge avenue for professional black singers, you know, all the way back. People talk about Thomas Dorsey as being the first creator of American black dancehall gospel, which was influenced by jazz and blues. But of course the other one was Mahalia Jackson. So they had a godmother as well as godfather. And right up to today, and then from the church, you get secular people like, I don't know, Aretha Franklin, right through to, I'm sure, Beyonce and everybody.
Mm-hmm. They all started off from the church.
Yes.
Same story happens in Ghana too now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the church gives you the platform to start.
Yes.
And then you break out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
so you've talked about Burger High Life, you've talked about Gospel High Life. What other forms?
Let me have a think.
Hip Life?
Well, of course, I should, yes, but hip-hop high life, it's a collapse of the word. According to Reggie Roxton, it was originally hip-hop high life. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to vernacularize American hip-hop. So he wanted to give it a Ghanaian flavor. So he called it hip-hop high life, hip life. And in fact, actually, at the very beginning, there was very little high life in. I think he did a couple of songs that were based on high life, but most of the hip life artists originally, the rhythms were hip-hop
beats, that's it.
And then the revolution occurred. You could say that the first layer of hip life was indigenized the words into African or Ghanaian language, primarily Twi, of course, but Gat and Pidgin sometimes. And then, of course, about 10 years after hip life was born, you got the development of Jama hip life, where you got the integration of traditional, but the youth didn't want to call it high life because high life was out. Mm-hmm. It was Kolo, you know, so they just gave it a different name.
Jama.
So Jama high life is actually hip life, high life,
right.
where the dance beats have become high life. And that was very, very successful. And then, of course, this ultimately has paved the way to Afrobeats. And the very first Afrobeats to develop wasn't in Nigeria, it was in Ghana, it was Azonto. And Azonto was actually, you see, one of the problems with hip life is, okay, they've indigenized the words. So we've got the word hip life, Reggie Roxton, and so on. Then...
Is he the founder?
Yeah, some people will quarrel about this, but let's for the moment take that he was the guy. There were some other guys also putting hip life or hip hop into Twi and so on. He wasn't the only one, but let's say he's the most famous. Then they came up with the Ghanaian dance beats. So the second layer, Africanization or Ghanaian. The third layer, they still didn't have a specific dance. They didn't have a dance for hip life. Most dances, most African and black dances, as they merge, they come up with a dance pattern. But hip life didn't have a dance pattern. That was what Azonto was. That's why people won't say that Azonto was hip life. It was more an electronic dance that it was a simplified form of high life, but it was dance oriented. So it was a specific dance, you know, one-legged dance and dancing based on
kind of movements, calling your phone, things like that.
Some of it, a lot of it, I think, drew on Ga music actually, because it was born more in the metropolis.
Why hasn't it survived till now?
Because it was superseded or swallowed by Afrobeats. And
Afrobeats swallowed up Azonto.
Yes, and it was done by a Ghanaian in London.
Who is that Ghanaian?
I can give you his name. He was called...
Is it Fuse?
No. He was one of the people that this guy... He was called DJ Abrantier.
Abrantier, yes.
Yeah. And what he had a radio program in London called Afrobeats.
Yes.
That was just the name of a radio program. And he featured a lot of Azonto because Azonto was very popular in London at the time. And then he included, you know, I mean, let's say Niger rap, and from different African countries. So he started to call this new type of electronic dance music Afrobeats. And then it sort of, I mean, in fact, with the Zonto, I don't know if you remember, WizKid and some of these guys said they invented.
Yes.
They even, yeah.
And wanted to give it a different name.
Yeah, they give it a slightly...
Alingo or something.
Yes, yes. They were a little bit annoyed that the Ghanaians had beaten them on this one. So later on now, that it's shifted to Nigeria.
Isn't that ironic that a Ghanaian DJ is responsible for this Afro beats?
Yeah, but he regrets.
He regrets it?
He regrets because it created a huge problem more in Nigeria than Ghana, because the older generation in Nigeria were also very upset with this word Afrobeats. Because, and you know that I gave a speech at one of the celebrations, I think 2013. I was invited by fella's daughter to go and give a speech, and there was
okay, go ahead.
Yeni Kuti. Anyway, so what happened was that at that time there was a decision to have some sort of conference at what's it called, Liberty Square or something, Freedom Gardens, because the youth they wanted the word Afrobeats was now in, you know, I think
with the S.
Yes, with the S. That was that was invented in 2011. Now, Azonto came around about 2010 or 2009. So that's why I say Azonto preceded it by a couple of years. But then, okay, the word was invented. In some ways, it doesn't really matter. I mean, as long as the thing goes through. But there was this problem in Ghana, and so they had a meeting with the older generation, the fella people like myself, and the younger people, and they asked me to arbitrate, because I was a foreigner, I don't think as a white, but as a non-Nigerian.
Exactly.
You know, and I was coming in as a neutral observer.
But they didn't know that you were a fella guy.
Well, they did. So the older generation were very confident that I would side with them against the youth, and I didn't.
You did not?
No.
Why not?
Because what I argued in the end, I mean, the youth put their point of view forward, but what I said is that every generation has the right to recycle the culture.
Big time.
You know, and I said something like that they are paying a sort of back homage to fella, even if they're not aware of it. And that's proved very true now, because every time you see Afrobeats in America or wherever, there's also a picture of fella somewhere, or a reference to fella, or some of the songs use fella's expressions.
Yeah. In fact, at the Grammys, the winner for one of the awards actually came on with Fella's What I No Get Enemy.
Yeah, but that was a mistake. You know that was a mistake?
Why was that a mistake?
Because that woman, that South African woman, had a song which was called Water.
Yes.
And they went and got mixed up with the wrong song.
So that was, it wasn't like her intro song?
No. I was told it was a mistake.
Oh boy.
But what a wonderful mistake.
A wonderful mistake, because that song just, I said, wow, this is great.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, so this is why I'm not, you know, I'm not really born in, I don't really like electronic music. I have a problem because of my generation. I was brought up with
life.
Yeah, but so I've always had, I'm even teaching a course at New York University in cantonments on Afrobeats, and you know, it's not my cup of tea, but you see, the way I look at it, it's like this. The dance elements of Afrobeat, the way I put it about Afrobeats is that the Europeans have basically run out of rhythms. And even though they have many black American soul funk rhythms, these are finite, okay? Now compare this to Africa, how many rhythms? Nobody knows. We know there's over 1,000, 1,500 languages, 1,000 ethnic groups. Every ethnic group will have 100 drum rhythms. You're talking about maybe 12, 15,000 dance rhythms in Africa, indigenous ones. So if you're going to go, if now the world has gone dance crazy, call it electronic or not, where's the mother of all these rhythms?
It's right here.
Because, you know, I mean, no doubt that James Brown and funk music was absolutely superb music, but I think they've exploited it, or they've drawn, you know, hip-hop, American hip-hop was drawn on funk rhythms. You know, disco came out of funk music. So you can say that there are already so many variations of funk. And in fact, the original name for hip-hop in America wasn't hip-hop, it was electro-funk. That was the first name for what then became Grandmaster Flash called hip-hop.
Yeah.
So what the thing is that you know, they've exhausted poor old James Brown. He gave a wonderful gift to us, but he's just one guy, or it was one movement. I mean, I wouldn't say it was one
Probably
guy.
needs a break now, so we go somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. So this is one of the reasons why I wouldn't say that they're taking these traditional African rhythms to America, but they've got these repository at their back. But it's electronic. Now, it can be blown by the wind. This is the trouble. I compare it to a sailing ship. A sailing ship can be blown by any wind in any direction. So now it's electronic, gadgets, it's being blown, and now it's popular in the West, it's going to be blown willy-nilly. Okay, but at least it's being blown in the direction of Europe. So it means a possibility of a lot of collaborations and money coming to Africa, and opening up the doors to African traditional music, because if you can hook the Europeans and Americans on Afrobeats, some of them in a few years down the line will say, well, where did this music come from?
And they'll start going backwards.
Yeah, but the thing, the saving grace is fella. You see, you have to have a keel on a ship. If you don't have a keel, you'll be blown around by any wind blowing you in any direction. The keel is, and the wind combined gives you your sense of direction. They've actually retroactively reabsorbed, this is the Afrobeats generation, have reabsorbed fella into their, not cosmology, what would you call it?
So their worldview?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. And it's very much like what has happened with Blé Ambulé. Blé Ambulé retroactively was declared by the hiplifers as their ancestral man who invented hiplife in Ghana in the early 70s, when basically Blé Ambulé was doing funky highlife. I mean, there wasn't any hiplife, you know, so how can he be the ancestor of hiplife, you know? But so what happens is you see a young generation, let's say the Afrobeats today, the hiplifers of yesterday. The first thing you do as a young man or young woman when you're developing a new form of music is you want to push away everything old. So the hiplife generation, everything old,
They're not interested.
They're not interested. But then what they do is they rework the history and decide which of the ancestors are worthy of being reabsorbed.
Yes.
And it's happened. This
almost
is,
like a patron saint.
Yes, exactly. You're inventing it retroactively.
Yeah.
That's why I mean the younger people will be, when they recycle the culture, it will include the patron saints. It's not for you to decide who the saint of the young people.
Yeah,
maybe they don't like you because you're old and you've destroyed the country, or you're a politician or something. So it's very interesting what's going on. The same thing seems to have happened with Afrobeats, that fella is now inside.
And fella came from Highlife.
And not just that, fella's political statements.
Yes.
He's a Pan-African socialist, you know. I mean, so so it means that this music might be just for enjoyment, dancing, but it has a heavyweight keel.
And you see that in the Highlife and the Afrobeats, and even we're not even talked about Amapiano, because Amapiano and Afrobeats are almost coming together in a way. Do you hear the political statements in the lyrics?
Not necessarily,
music?
No. It's sometimes there's some of the Afrobeats musicians are very political. I mean, there's one woman Afrobeats musician who uses some of fella's songs to make a critique of fella about his attitude to women. You know, when you become ancestralized, how your descendants will use your sainthood is up to them.
Yes, indeed.
And they can even use you for opposite purposes.
Exactly, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, but it means you're inside the system.
Yeah, and that's important.
Yeah, because Afrobeats would just be a new whim, a new fashion from Africa that floats around the West and then is blown away or something. But it's come with a heavy keel, which is African socialism, even though the youth may not realize it. And it's funny that Nigeria's produced a Labour Party.
Peter Obi.
Yeah. Finally, after all these years, and after, you know, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. So I'm actually quite optimistic about Afrobeats, even though I don't like the music itself very much. I find, I mean, but of course
what don't you like about it?
No, the electronic aspect.
Okay, all right. You would wish it was live.
Yes, but of course live versions.
They do play live concerts.
Yeah, of course they do. Burna Boy and all these, they do live.
So, looking at the Highlife now, before we talk about where Highlife is going, why isn't Highlife global?
Um, Ghana missed its chance.
Ghana missed the chance.
Yeah, yeah.
When and where and how?
You see, this Afrobeats is not the first time African music has hit the jackpot with the West. Commercial possibilities and so on. There was another earlier form of music called world music.
Yes.
In Paul
Peter
Simon.
Gabriel and all
Yeah,
those people.
yeah. So that was the 1980s. And so this, and I was involved with this with people I knew in London. In fact, I was at the meeting where the word world music was invented, and I put my hand out and said no. Me, one Ghanaian guy, Charlie Eastman, we both said no. You have to call it. We were calling it Afro pop.
Yeah.
And they said no. The word Afro is outdated, and we want to. But anyway.
So the globality, why a high life is not global? And you said we
Yeah.
missed a chance. Ghana missed a chance.
Yeah, because we've had a coup and a curfew and the collapse of the music industry.
3 C's.
And
Coup, curfew, collapse.
yeah, and then also there was something. There was this switch to burger high life. Now the thing about the generation of whites who fell in love with world music is they had a very romantic attitude to Africa. It represented the past, live music, authentic music. They were in a sort of a romantic. It wasn't just from Africa. It had to represent something. So they didn't want to, and the whites had been oversaturated with maybe electronic music. So they were looking for folk music, including African folk music, popular music, for the old ways, the folk music, the authentic. So they weren't.
They didn't take kindly to burger high life.
No, or any type of, and so it never sold at all. The burger high life never sold. And if you went into the shops in London, it was Osibisa or, you know, or even Nana Dancer Abium, Pan-African Orchestra, and all these types of things that were being sold there and being sort of going to WOMAD festivals. So there was a sort of a romantic hang-up of the Western audience. I mean, so for instance, I can give you an example. This guy, Youssou N'Dour, they fell in love with Youssou N'Dour's music,
Senegal.
a battery of ambalax drums. So he decided one year go to Germany on the cheap, and he wouldn't take his ambalax section or his full horn section. He would make do with a synthesizer and a drum machine or something. And he was booed off the stage.
Completely, I can imagine.
Yeah.
They wanted the real deal.
Yeah. Now, but what's happening now with Afrobeats, the European audience or American audience are not looking at African in a sentimental, romanticized way. They just want the dance rhythms.
To sell records, to make money?
No,
just to enjoy.
To heal the body.
Okay.
It's a healing. You see, you have to remember that the Europeans have constantly invented forms of music which disconnect the human body from music. The first example was the Catholics. You can't, or the church. You can't dance in the church to God. The second example is classical music.
You can't clap until it's over.
Yeah, you can't tap your feet or do anything.
You can't.
You find that the Europeans probably, if not for black music, would not even have dances. Maybe there'd be some few dances in a museum of some ancient form of folk music. but basically, I mean, the very time that classical music was disintegrating in the late 19th century, before the modernist, the modern forms of 20th century music and so on, that was exactly when black music came into the vacuum. There's this famous quote by, is it Dvorak? Do you know about Dvorak?
He's a classical composer.
Yeah, so he went to America in the 1890s, spoke at the conservatory to whites, and they were all asking, you created your folk music from Czech folk music, you've done very well. What about us in America? What folk music are we going to use? And he shocked them. He said Negro melodies.
One time.
Yeah. And of course they rejected it.
Of course.
But at the same time, that was actually what was going on.
That was the truth.
Yeah. And black music has conquered white culture. I mean, just like Christianity conquered the Roman Empire. If you take a slave people into your society, you have got a problem in the future. You may hate the slaves or suppress them, your children may, your grandchildren, but there'll become a point when the slave culture will become very important to your descendants. Of the oppressors I'm talking about.
Indeed.
They'll
get to enjoy it.
Yeah, and so look at what happened to the Romans. They became the Catholic Church, the Roman Church.
Indeed.
So the same thing has happened with black music. So basically the Europeans took improvisation and the body, the dance, out of music, and then into the vacuum came black music. So in some ways I consider that the most cosmopolitan music. I mean, this is the interesting thing about Afrobeats music. It's the most cosmopolitan music in the world at the moment.
Why do you say so?
Because Africans have had to absorb the culture of the white man, the oppressor. They also absorbed or welcomed the culture of the black Americans, but they also had their African culture.
It's only there.
Yeah. Whereas if you go to America, you have the white and the black, but you don't have the original African. You see, so if you oppress somebody, they have to be cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
They have to learn your language and so on. I mean, so I think the level of Afrobeats penetrating the world now is partly because of the new rhythms that they're going to introduce.
Okay.
Even if they haven't introduced all of them, it's the beginning.
So there's more on the way.
Exactly.
And Highlife missed that.
Yes, it missed it because, I mean, I was here, you know, I couldn't do anything. You know,
The coups messed us up.
Yeah, the coups, the curfews, the attitude to putting music at the lowest. You know, there was 160% import duty tax on musical instruments.
So nobody could buy live.
Yeah, you couldn't even change your guitar strings. You know, I had to use pumice stone to take some old string and wipe off the rust.
Wow.
I mean, so there were, but then when Ghana did start producing music, it was technopop. That's the Burger Highlife. And the Europeans had enough. Those Europeans who wanted authenticity weren't coming to Africa to listen to high-tech African music. It had to be low-tech.
Let's just speculate, if Burger Highlife had incorporated a lot more of the traditional African rhythms, because Afrobeat is also computer music, really, but it has maybe technology has helped because now you have loops of music that is live.
No, the problem with because I was running a studio here and I had to buy. The musicians insisted I have a drum machine. The first drum machines were very primitive. They weren't sophisticated enough to handle African rhythms, or you had to borrow a samba rhythm.
Yeah.
So the rhythm. So when you moved into the early Burger, you had to pick rhythms which Europeans had worked on, and there was no, I don't know, quantization or whatever for African rhythms.
Yeah.
Everything. You see, the thing about the Afrobeats generation, and this is where Highlife really helped. Highlife was the music that taught young African musicians modern technology. They are now as conversant with modern technology as a European or American. There's no difference. Burger, they were just beginning, you know, so they were using very primitive drum machines.
So technology helped.
Yeah, and the mastering of technology.
Yes.
So the Afrobeats generation are the people who are coming at an equal level to the West. You see, before there was always, the African is there, but it's
not
maybe,
quite there.
Yeah, it's not white, but it's maybe mixed with Black American, Afro-funk, Afrobeat, or the old Afrobeat and so on. But now I would say there's complete equality between the two types of cultures, because the white needs black rhythms. They've needed black rhythms for the last 150 years. Now they're getting directly from source, from Africa itself.
Yeah, from Afrobeats.
And also they're dealing with an African generation now that is as up to date as any white person.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
No difference again. How come Highlife didn't take over the world?
Well, it did in a way.
It did,
Yeah, if you think about it, it went everywhere. Even in Africa, there's so many different names for different. There was Highlife in Ghana. It's just our particular name.
Yeah.
I mean, there was Niger rap or Afro hip hop. I think they have. If you look at East Africa, they have bongo flavor or something. They have everywhere it went. I mean, it did take over the world. It did, but the thing is that Highlife is based on funk rhythms.
And I know the argument of the funk.
Which is a bridge. It's a bit like the West Indians when they came here. They can act as a bridge as a stepping stone for African musicians. Okay, you can use funk because there are so many connections between funk and African music. Fela used a lot of funk and R&B in his ideas when it was his Afrobeat. But I think Afrobeats itself is the first era of equality. Now, you could say, well, it's just another dance form. You know, dancing, if you believe that dancing is unimportant to human life, which a lot of Europeans do, they're regimented people. They follow the Hitler type of, although it's not as extreme as Hitler, but that regimented type of thing, or body-mind dualism, or not dancing in churches, not the black churches, but the white churches. I mean, So that is a very important contribution. So under certain circumstances, even to be able to dance is a revolutionary act, because Western society has systematically tried to remove dancing from music, to cripple us as human beings, so that we just become like floating brains, disconnected from our body. And they've even built a whole religion based on these principles, that the brain or the soul or whatever is more heavenly than the body, which is low. And it's been manifested in the way that all sorts of music have been disconnected from dancing. But now that we have pure dance music, of course, it can go the other way. It will just be people dancing with no politics.
And enjoying themselves.
But that also is a revolutionary act.
Indeed.
In a capitalist system where you're not meant to enjoy yourself. It's a Protestant work ethic. It goes against the Protestant work ethic.
Indeed.
So it's a very interesting time.
So the revolution is on the dance floor.
Yes. Yeah, or one place. I mean, I'm
part of the revolution.
Yes, and luckily, inside this revolution is Fela Kuti.
Which is good.
Yes.
Where is Highlife going?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the names you see get changed, generations come. As I mentioned to you earlier, the UNESCO is about to make Highlife into an intangible cultural heritage next year.
What would that mean for us?
For Ghana?
Yes.
Well, yeah. I did raise the question about what about Nigeria? Can't we be inclusive?
Yeah.
And go in, because the Ghanaians and the Nigerians, I mean, Nigeria really, because its size, has made a major contribution to Highlife. But they've sort of said, well, the Nigerians have to make their own case for this.
How do you make it? You apply to, who do you apply to? Is it a UNESCO thing?
I think, yes, it came up from the UNESCO people who were here, and then they approached the Musicians Union and the Folklore Board, and then I was brought in. And what they really wanted me in for is to prove that the word Highlife really did come from Ghana.
Okay.
And I did get up at one meeting and said, look, can't we treat Highlife as an ECOWAS music, a pan-West African music? And, you know, and the nationalistic, maybe...
A bit like jazz. Jazz comes from the whole of the states. Or is it fixed from one to one place?
No, there are West Coast jazz,
New Orleans,
New York.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I didn't want to get too much. I mean, I did my bit. And in fact, they said I was the person who saved Highlife. Because, of course, some Nigerians have got annoyed with me about this. That's when I bring up the funny story about jollof rice. You know, we're also quarreling about jollof rice. So basically, Highlife is a pan-West African phenomenon, from predominantly English-speaking West Africa.
Indeed.
But it involved all the countries. Maybe not the Cameroon so much. They had their Makossa, but most certainly Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, definitely, right from the beginning. And it's sort of spread, and it's gone backwards. In fact, I've written a book about 10 years ago, which is published in Nigeria, which is called Highlife Giants. And in it, I explore the 80-year relationship between Nigeria and Ghana in terms of Highlife music. So how it started in Ghana, went to Nigeria, then Nigerian bands came to Ghana, Bobby Benson, the Delta Dandies in the 50s. Then the Nigerians went back, then the Nigerians came back, and then the Ghanaians went during the hardship times with Kuku Seku going to eastern Nigeria.
Yeah.
So there's always been this dialogue between Ghana and Nigeria in terms of Highlife, for at least since the 1930s.
So it's not just jollof, it's not just football, it's music too.
Yeah.
What are your concluding thoughts on this conversation of where Highlife has come from, where it is now, and where it's going, Professor Collins?
Wow, that's a hard question, because it's an open book. I'm not sure if I can give any definitive directions. Well, one thing I would say, one of the most disastrous policies of Ghana in recent years has been the demotion of music in the education system, particularly for school children. You see, Nkrumah always used the schools to teach children music through traditional folk songs and so on. You know, their Tentaben, Ephraim Amu, etc. Now, in the very time when we were having curfews and the music industry was crumbling and lots of Ghanaian musicians were going to Nigeria or Germany, the burger guys, the youth didn't have the role models. The bands, you know, a lot of the bands in Ghana collapsed in the 80s. A lot of the venues collapsed. So this would have been the time for the government, because they caused the problem, to solve the problem by making sure that music was a very viable portion of the school children. I'm not talking about university now, but school children. And they took it out of the school system, history and music. And then the older generation of Ghanaians now condemn the youth for not knowing their history and not knowing their music.
When it's not even on the curriculum in the first place.
Yeah, yes, but it was.
It was in the past, yes.
Yes, and even a second Ghanaian language. They took out a second Ghanaian language, which Nkrumah put in to make sure that it counteracts tribalism.
Exactly.
Everybody,
you can speak another language apart from this.
Yes, in fact, 2 other languages. You see, just to make sure.
Yes.
So the older generation can't blame the youth for having to reinvent the wheel. So they invented it through technology. Burger Highlife, you call it technopop, or you can call it hip life, and now Afrobeats. So that, I mean, I was even having telephone calls from radio stations. When was the word live music invented? And I said, well, all music was live.
It was always live.
Until, you know, the 1980s.
And then the technology came.
Yeah, miming and lip syncing.
Yes, indeed.
So it's a lot. I think really the only thing you can do is get to the children, and the younger the better. And if it has to be done through churches, do it through churches, do it through schools, because a lot of the traditional context of music making is disappearing, you know. And a lot of the old bands that could have acted as role models, those musicians have gone, or, you know, I mean, look at Nana Ampedu, he became an evangelist or whatever. I mean, they had to leave music. They couldn't make money from music.
And that's why we are really grateful that you have, for many years, documented the story of music, not just in Ghana, but across Africa. And we're really grateful to you. And I'm really, I've just been in awe of the knowledge that you have about the subject, and I've learned a lot from this conversation. I'm going to end with you playing something for me. Maybe your favorite Highlife song, or tune, or rhythm, or yes.
I'm playing in Congo. I've forgotten the Congo, just to let me make one last point.
Yes, please make that Congo coda for me.
Because when I was first in Ghana, with listening to Ghanaian music in bars with my father, what woke me up to Highlife was Congolese music. Congolese music, there was a song called Shama Shama, there was Franco, OK Jazz,
Franco,
there was
OK
Dr.
Jazz.
Nico.
Yes.
That music was very, very, very big in Ghana, man. Very big. I mean, small bars were playing Congolese music. And so there was a massive Congolese influence coming into Ghana, besides all the other ingredients. You know, so and there was a number of Ghanaian musicians who ended up in the Congo.
Wow.
Like my old friend T.O. Jazz.
The music took them there.
Yeah, yeah.
Play for me again.
Okay, this was, I think this one is called Paramount.
Play for me as I do my outro.
Okay, let me say.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this very special edition of History Time with musician, researcher, author, chronicler of the history of music, not just in Ghana, but across West Africa. Hope you're proud of your heritage, as I am right now, listening to all the stories and the beautiful music. Many, many thanks to my guest, Professor John Collins. Put your comments down below. What did you most enjoy about this conversation? And I'll see you in the next video. God bless. Thank you so much.